For this demonstration, we'll be making apple crisp. As you can see, to prepare this recipe, we'll need cooking apples. I have here red Rome and some Granny Smith. We're going to use the red Rome apples. We also need some white granulated sugar, some rolled oats, brown sugar, flour, cinnamon, and margarine. In order to prepare our recipe, we'll need a few tools. We'll need a small mixing bowl, dry measuring cups, measuring spoons, a straight edge spatula, a wire whisk, a pastry blender, a rubber scraper, a casserole dish to put our completed recipe in, and of course a paring knife and a cutting board for the apples. For demonstration purposes, I'm going to start with the topping because I don't want the apples to brown while they sit and wait for me to make the topping. In class, however, you should make sure that you have one or preferably two people cutting and peeling the apples and getting those ready while someone else focuses on the topping. Typically, you have your head cook and your assistant cook, and you'll need to recruit your washer or your dryer to help out as well. So for the topping, we need the oats, the brown sugar, the flour, the cinnamon, and the margarine. And the margarine's going to stay in the refrigerator until we're ready to use it because it needs to be very cold in order to work properly. Now this topping is pretty delicious, and so often I will double the topping on the apple crisp, and that's what I'm going to do with today's demonstration. So I'm going to start out with my oats, my flour, my cinnamon. Notice that the cinnamon is not leveled off like the flour was. I want to have a little more flavor from our cinnamon. And then our brown sugar, we should always check and make sure we packed it well. And we can tell if we did that if it holds the shape of the cup when it comes out of the measuring cup. So with those 4 ingredients in the bowl, I'm going to whisk them together until they're a nice homogeneous mixture, till it all looks like one. Get rid of any lumps of brown sugar in that process. Anything gets stuck in the whisk, you can just knock it back out. Almost there. Okay, so now that it's all mixed together and it all looks pretty much the same, we're going to go ahead and grab that margarine from the refrigerator. We'll cut it into a few chunks to help get it started. Whenever you're cutting in something, that tells you that you have to use this tool. That's a pastry blender. And a pastry blender is used with a push twist motion, just like this. And every so often, you'll need to stop and clean off the pastry blender. That solid fat, in this case it's margarine, sometimes it's shortening or butter, gets stuck at the beginning. We're trying to get this down to small pieces. What's important to remember is that every time you clean the pastry blender off, you want to drag it through those ingredients. This way I'm coating all those pieces of margarine, and that makes it easier to get the rest of them down into smaller pieces. That's our goal. Now you can overdo this and it won't turn out very well. We want this to be lots of little pieces that we can sprinkle over the top of the apples right before we bake it. You'll notice that the recipe does have directions for microwaving, and if you don't have an oven available, it's not a bad way to go. But if you have a choice, the baked method is quite a bit better. So I would recommend baking your crisps anytime you can. And while this is an apple crisp recipe, you really can substitute up to 5 cups of almost any fruit. I would caution though, if you use berries, you might want to add a little bit of cornstarch in with the sugar for the berries, or a little more flour in with the sugar, because the berries tend to be very juicy and it gets very runny. And it's almost like soup with streusel topping. And that's not really appealing. All right, so we're almost there. You can see that this gets a little bit darker in color as we go through the process. It's starting to stick together a little bit more. There's not as many dry, powdery parts to what's in the bowl. And those are the things you're going to look for to tell you when your streusel topping is finished. Drag it through one more time here. That looks great. So there's no more white powder. You can't see the flour at all. Just lots of pieces. Even down at the bottom of the bowl, there's no dry ingredients. So we want to make sure we don't overdo it. So we're going to stop here and we're going to set it aside and we're going to prepare our apples. In order to get our apples ready, they have to be peeled, they have to be cored, and they have to be sliced. We want to try to make sure that the slices are pretty uniform in size so that they all bake at the same rate. There are a few ways that you can prepare your apples. If you are not very comfortable with cutting yet, you may wish to cut them into quarters first. And with the apple on the cutting board, take the core off. Make sure you keep your fingers curled back and out of the way. And then you're going to remove that peel. A lot of new cooks find it a little bit easier to quarter them first, to peel them, and then with the flat side down so it doesn't move as much. That's safer to work with. We're going to slice so that they're fairly uniform in size. Little off the top, little off the bottom. Makes it a little bit easier to get that peel off of the quartered apple. We do want to work kind of quickly because we do not want the apples to brown on us. And in class, we don't have a lot of time. So it's extremely important that you have more than one person cutting apples simultaneously. Now you'll notice that the recipe called for 3 apples, but it called for 3 large apples. So in order to make sure I have enough fruit, so I want to have about 5 cups of fruit total. I'm going to make sure that I do 4 or maybe even 5 of these apples because they're a little bit smaller. They're a medium apple at best, and some of them are really small. Once you've had a little practice at peeling apples, you can cut them more like I am here, where you just go around the apple. Personally, I find that to be a little bit faster. Again, new cooks are sometimes nervous about cutting like this. Sometimes they fear the knife. Always remember, it's important to keep your knife sharp. You'll actually get a worse cut from a dull knife because of the amount of increased pressure that you'll have to put on it to make the cut. So we're just going to finish going around this apple. So I'm also doing this so that I'm peeling all of them, then I'll core them, and then I'll slice them. Go for one more apple. I like to take the stem out if it's there as much as possible to help get it out of the way. Now we're going to core these. We're going to do that by cutting them into quarters. So some of you might be thinking that an apple, that circular wedger would be easier. But I'm not a big fan of those. Sometimes they miss the core altogether if it's off-centered in the apple. The wedges are too big, and sometimes they can even make it a little more difficult to get the apples to the size slices that you want. So we just want to get that core out of there. Now we can slice that right into our casserole dish. So you'll notice that I did not put the apples in a separate bowl. I'm putting them right into the casserole dish. A little more of that core out. And then I'm going to sprinkle the sugar over the apples right in the dish and mix that together before I sprinkle the streusel topping. In the meantime, I have my oven preheating to 375 degrees. The nice thing about this dish is you can have it prepared all ahead. You can put the topping on it. And then when you're about an hour out from when you'd like to eat it, you can just put it in, preheat the oven and put it in. Because it does bake for 30 to 35 minutes. And you'll want to give it a little bit of time to set when it comes out of the oven before you dish it up. That's even more true if you do berries. But sometimes we like to do a peach blueberry combination. Again, we just measure those fruits until we get about 5 cups of fruit like the recipe says. You could do mixed berries. You can work with fresh fruits or frozen. Frozen are really convenient. I like those. Just thaw them a little bit. Someone else already did the peeling and the slicing for you. Just a few more apples to get through. Now, when we get ready to see if this is done, the best way to test it is to take a fork and stick it into the dish. And if it goes into the apples easily and they're soft, then it's all ready to go. You'll even start to see some of the apple juices bubble up through the topping that we'll put on right before it's ready to take out of the oven. Just 2 more pieces here. You can see sometimes I don't get quite all that core at the beginning, so I'll just take a little slice off before I put it into the dish. And then we're just going to take our granulated sugar and sprinkle that over our apples. Stir that together. I like to just use the rubber scraper that I've already used. Again, save a dish. And once those apples are pretty well coated, we're going to kind of press them down so they're even. And then we're going to sprinkle that topping so it covers the apples and goes all the way to the edge of the dish. Use that rubber scraper to make sure we get every bit of it out. Now this you don't want to press flat. We want it to have that natural texture that was developed with the pastry blender. Gives a nice look. So now it's all, your apple crisp is all ready to put in the oven. So after about 30 or 35 minutes in a 375-degree oven, your topping will have a nice brown color. A fork will easily go into the apples without resistance. You'll know it's done. Let it sit for about 5 or 10 minutes and then it's ready to serve. It also goes great with a scoop of vanilla ice cream or a little bit of whipped cream if you choose not to enjoy it all by itself.